right, it's 5 o'clock. How's everybody doing today? All one of you? Alrighty. Alright, it's 5 o'clock. We got music from Ben Sounds. Gotta say that so I can use the royalty-free music. We got 4 people in here. Got some people joining in. It's your boy Hayden. I'm here to walk you through a little bit of photography. We'll be taking everything from basic stuff all the way up to some pro shots. Today we are talking about shutter speed. Shutter speed. Hello everybody. We're going to give it a minute to get started, and then we'll get started on the basics of everything to do with shutter speed. This is everything you wanted to know about photography with Hayden Green. I'm going to one of these days come up with a good name for this actual show. Photography with Hayden Green just doesn't roll off your tongue, right? So maybe y'all can suggest some names in the comment section. How's everybody doing today? Everybody having a good day? Is it warm? That's too long. You're right. I need a new name. You're the smart one, Photo Mommy. All right. All right, here we go. So, my name is Hayden Green. I will be your host today. I am a photographer from Brooklyn. I have done a number of different types of photography. We do commercial photography. We've done weddings. We've done all kinds of different things. But I'm a self-taught photographer, and which means that I can teach you, and then you can go and learn some of the same stuff that I did, just in the same way that I did, right? Photography is one of those things that really takes you to a different level. It adds to your storytelling, and I'm here to help. If you have any questions, please feel free to put it in the chat. I will get to it as we're talking. So, you got a question, just jump in right there. Also, you'll see that there's a tip jar. So if all of these are free and you have not been charged to get in here, if somebody charged you to get in here, you should get your money back from them. But if you feel like you're getting good information and getting good tips, give me a tip, right? So we will be looking at all the different aspects of photography. Today, we're going to talk about shutter speed. And so we will be talking about shutter speed from the basic stuff, where like what happens when you press the button, right? What happens inside of the camera. We'll walk through that. But we'll also get to the point where we'll have some pro tips for those of you who have ever, if you have a DSLR and you've taken a picture and there's a black bar across the bottom. What's that about, right? So we'll talk about why that is and what's happening, and we'll get some pro tips on that as well. Okay, so where do we start? We start at the beginning. A shutter. So in a camera, as we discussed last week, in a camera, there is an image on one side. So here's a camera, right? So there's an image. So right now you're the image, right? So there's an image on one side, and the light bouncing off of that image goes into this lens, and it's happening all the time, right? So there's not a time where there isn't light coming into the lens. But what happens when you actually take a picture is that there is a what we call a curtain that comes up and allows that light to hit the back of the camera here where the sensor is, or the film. So if you're using a digital camera, it's a sensor. If it's a film camera, it's the film, right? So that shutter, that curtain that comes up and down, that's called a shutter, right? And when you press the shutter release button, so a lot of people just call this the shutter, but this is called the shutter release button. But we'll call it the shutter button because a lot of people call it that. So when you press the shutter release button, what it does is tells that curtain to go up, right? And shutter speed is telling the curtain how fast to go up. So a couple of things before we move on from the actual shutter. There are a couple of things that you need to know about a shutter. So in the olden days, a shutter did this, right? So let's say my eyes are where the sensor is. In the olden days, the shutter would do this and then close back, right? Modern cameras are a little bit different. So in most modern cameras, you have two curtains, okay? So what is happening is that the first curtain goes up, exposes the sensor or the film, and then the second curtain comes up and closes out the light again. Okay, so it is a race between first curtain and the second curtain, and that's important to know because we will talk about how that affects if you see a black bar going across your picture right there. Okay, so you no longer have just like one thing opening up or one thing going down. You now have two, right? And they're separating and closing back. All right, so those are your two curtains, your two shutter curtains. And you'll hear me use those words over and over again. Shutter curtains, and how fast they move, it will really determine what your shutter speed is. All right, so let's talk numbers. All right, so when you look on a camera here, let's see if you can get in there here. Good, right. So when you look on the camera here, most of the times your shutter speed is right up in here. That's this number up here. So right now, this is saying 40, and I can make an adjustment to that. Oh, it's on manual, that's why. And I can make an adjustment to that, and right now, the shutter speed is at 640, right? So what that is saying, that is actually a fraction of a number, all right? That number is actually 1/640th of a second. Okay, so it's 1/640th of a second, which is why, which is why when your number goes up, the shutter goes faster. And what that means is that the time that it takes for this second curtain to catch up and close out the light is 1/640th of a second. And that's really fast when you think about it, right? But also you have to think about how fast light is. Light is probably traveling far more faster than that, right? So if you're in a bright light, you're probably going to use a setting like that. But if you're in darker light, you might drop it all the way down to something like, what does that say? 1/50th of a second. Right? And you can take this all the way down until it starts to look like this, where it is actually 3 seconds, 4 seconds, right? And so you can leave, so now the shutter here is open for 1 minute, right? So now the shutter it goes click, 1 minute goes by, click, right? And so that's what these numbers mean on here. It means how fast your shutter is going. Most of the times you're not going to go below 60, and we'll talk about why that is. We'll talk about handshake and the whole 9 yards. But so you know the basics of it now. The number that's on there is the time that it takes for the shutter to close out, right? So the bigger the number, the faster the shutter speed. The faster the shutter speed, it means the less amount of time that light has to get to the sensor, right? So you just really think about it, right? When you do this, as opposed to that takes a little less time. And the little less time that it takes, it means that less light is getting in, right? So this is one of the legs of the Holy Trinities, right? So if you're talking about shutter speed as one of the legs of the Holy Trinity, it's all about capturing the light. It's all about trying to figure out how you get that light into your photograph, how you get what you're seeing onto your sensor. And photography, if nothing else, is interpreting the light that is bouncing off of your sensor. That's it. That is the whole long and short of what photography is. It is trying to capture the light that is bouncing off of your sense of your subject and putting it on your sensor. And the Holy Trinity, when we talk about aperture, ISO, and now shutter speed, well, first shutter speed for us, those are different ways that we control just how much light is coming into our sensor, right? So that's the first the first thing you need to know about shutter speed. It controls how much light you're getting. The second thing is that objects will emit light at different speeds depending on how fast they're moving, which means the shutter speed is what you're going to try to use if you're making a determination as to whether you have a fast-moving object or a slow-moving object or a stationary object. All right, so what does that mean? So if my hand goes by like this, right, the time that the light has to bounce off my hand, bounce back into the sensor, and come back and do a reconfirmation kind of thing is very, very small because the hand is moving, right? So you may not get a sharp image of it if it's moving, moving past really fast like this, right? So, and we'll do that, and I'll do that right now. So I'm gonna lower. I'm gonna set my ISO pretty high so that we have a good, decent amount of light here, right? And I'm gonna lower my shutter speed, right? All right, here we go. We're focused now, all right? So I'm gonna take a picture of my hand. Okay, so there's my hand, right? Looks pretty standard, right? What I'm now gonna do at that same shutter speed, I'm gonna move my hand pretty fast. Do you see the difference? So what the camera is having a hard time doing is picking up the light and putting it on the sensor in the same way that at the same rate that the thing is moving. And so that's at 1/30th of a second, so 30 on your shutter speed, which means that it's too slow of a shutter speed. It's getting too much information of a moving object to get a crisp object, to get a crisp image, right? So if I wanted to capture my hand staying still and while it was moving and I'm indoors, I might raise it all the way up to 400, right? So same image, hold on. And we'll learn about this later, but I'm gonna raise my ISO so you can actually see it. So I'm gonna move my hand. Same moving hand, now it's crisp. Because now I have matched how fast the image is going with how fast my shutter speed is going, right? And so, and I'll take my hat off because it's getting hot in here. So what you'll see is that a lot of sports, a lot of movement, even if you're photographing flowers and the wind is moving the flower about, needs a higher shutter speed, all right? So the higher the shutter speed, the more you will be able to, the more that you'll be able to capture objects that are moving really, really fast. Now, if your objects are stationary, that they're not moving, my glasses are sitting up here, right? So I'm going to take a picture of my glasses. Right, so those are my glasses. And so that's at 400. And I'm not going to move my ISO. Here's a real interesting, and I will talk about that later. And I'm going to drop it all the way down to 60. Look how much brighter it is. Okay? Same image, same glasses, and all I did was change my shutter speed. Right? See how much more light you get in with a lower shutter speed because now the shutter is open wider, it's open longer, sorry, and you're allowing more light to come in. So I haven't changed anything else. You saw that. I didn't change anything else except for my shutter speed, and I was able to get more light in. So again, one of the arms of the Holy Trinity is the shutter speed because it determines how much light is coming in. So you can make a determination like, okay, I'm going to take a picture of my glasses. My glasses aren't moving, so I can play with my shutter speed as much as I need to in order to get in order to get a crisp picture, right? But if my glasses start to move, if they were on my actual face and I was doing this thing, right, I might have to move my shutter speed up in order to match that, in order to get a proper image. But you saw that when you moved your shutter speed to a higher rate, you let in less light, so the image is darker. And next week we're going to talk a little bit about one of the other arms of the Holy Trinity to talk about, well, if you are getting one thing going and if you have one thing that you want to keep and you need to adjust other things in order to make that picture a little bit brighter, what do you look at? Do you look at your ISO or do you look at your aperture and so on and so forth? And so we'll talk a little bit more about that. So when you start to talk about shutter speed, one thing that comes up is handshake. Not handshake, handshake. Okay. So if you are holding a camera, you are a human being. You are not a robot, right? Which means that when you hold the camera, and some of these cameras are this one's pretty light. Fun fact, when I moved into doing cameras, like having cameras that actually had functionality, this was a hunking big camera to me. This was a big old camera. So yes, increase the shutter speed for movement. If anything is moving, you want to increase your shutter speed unless, and so here's one of the things I will always tell you, learn the rule and then learn why to break the rule, right? Unless you are looking for a blurred picture. Sometimes you want the picture to be blurry. Sometimes you're trying to show motion. And I'll show you a technique at the very end, and that'll explain what I'm talking about. But sometimes you're actually looking for the picture to be blurry, and I'll tell you why. So this camera is pretty heavy. This camera is about 5 pounds, right? And so this camera's about 7 pounds, right? So when you hold on to it, after a while, you're going to move. Plus, you're a human being. Your muscles are not, designed to hold something for, a long period of time. So every time you take down the shutter speed, every time you lower the shutter speed, you open yourself up to what is called handshake, which means that your hand might be shaking. And I'll show you that as well. So here's a picture of my glasses again. Here's a picture of my glasses, and that was at 320, right? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop this all the way down to 25, right? And what I'm going to do is simulate if my hand wasn't, okay, and I'm going to move my ISO back down so you can actually see the image because that's kind of blown out. I'm going to simulate if my hand wasn't steady. And you can't really see it, but the image is a little bit less crisp. So here's crisp, right? And then you come here, and the image is less crisp, all right? And so you'll see that in the fine details, right? So if you're holding the camera and you're all the way down, and generally most people say that it is in correlation to what your lens is. So if you've got a 50 millimeter on it, anything below 1/50th of a second will give you handshake. It depends on how, your own self, right? So I know people get handshake at 100, right? I know people who can take it all the way. I can take it all the way down to 30 sometimes, depending on how I'm holding it. So you have to start to think about that. So now you've set, if you have an image and it's like, all right, I've set the ISO exactly the way that I need it to be because I know what the ISO is going to do. I've set the aperture exactly where it needs to be because I know where I need my aperture to be. And the only way that I can get the picture that I need is to adjust my shutter speed. The subject is not moving, but I'm concerned about handshake. That's where you start to think about whether or not you get a tripod. Okay, and a tripod is simply going to tripod is going to give you the ability to sit the camera down and not have it shake because a tripod is a machine. Right? A tripod is actually a piece of equipment that's not going to move. It's not a human body. Right? So my advice is anytime you're getting into the realm of 60 and below on a shutter speed, you want to start thinking tripod. And so, and where you see this a lot is in landscape photography. So anytime you've seen any of those really big, massive cameras, massive pictures of mountains and all the rest of that stuff, that is with somebody sitting the camera on a tripod. And a lot of times everything else is changed, and the only way they can get all of the color and all of the light, especially if it's a dark picture, is if they sit the camera on a tripod so that it does not move. Okay? And that's important to know because there are a number of tricks that you can do for reducing handshake. Like for instance, if you take your arm, so you got your elbow here, and you jam that right into your ribs, and you sit your camera on top of your hand like that, this is going to reduce the amount of handshake that you have, right? Because now you've created this whole bone right here is not going to bend, and you've reduced the amount of moving parts. So you'll get maybe a little bit of this, but if you hold it straight right here and lock your wrist, now you've got yourself a really good monopod, right? And you become the tripod. And so if you put your body in that position, you tend to reduce camera shake, which would be very different than if you're standing here like this. Just from seeing here, you can see the rag, the cleaning cloth right here is giving motion just by me standing here, right? And it's very different than if I hold it like this, right? So that's one tip on how to reduce the handshake on that. For those of you who are using phones and other digital stuff, you want to go into, because all of this stuff is available on your phone as well. You want to go into your settings and look for the shutter speed. And what the great thing about phones is that as you change the shutter speed on your phone, you can start to see whether or not your image is going to get lighter or darker. And it shows right, it's a WYSIWYG screen, which stands for what you see is what you get. So when you start to move the slider back and forth with the shutter, you can start to see exactly how bright or how dark it's going to be. So that's a great thing about the phones. Plus, there are a lot of tripods and monopods and stuff like that that now work with phones that have clips for the phones, and you can set them. And phones are easier to find. They're so very, very much lighter than a camera. So finding a tripod for this thing is a lot different than trying to find a tripod for this or for my phone, right? So all of that stuff is in the phone, so you can make all of the adjustments. And the phones are especially that you want to pay attention to shutter speed, because you'll take a picture with your phone and you're like, oh man, why is that so blurry? And you're cleaning the camera as much as you possibly can, and you can't figure out why it's blurry. It might be because your hand is shaking. So you might want to go in, check your shutter speed, and move it up or down depending on what it is that you're taking a picture of. Especially if you're walking and taking a picture, that's the other piece, right? So all this time we've talked about whether or not the subject was missing, right? The subject isn't the only thing that's moving. So we talked about handshake, but sometimes you're walking down the street or you're moving and trying to get the shot. And so if you, the actual person hitting the shutter button, is moving as well, that will also determine whether or not your shot is going to be coming out clear or crisp, which also applies to if you're in a moving car or a bus or a boat or on a plane. Sometimes what your eyes see Your eyes shutter. Your eyes all have shutters. That's a whole biological thing. What your eye sees is taking it in at a faster rate than the camera is. And so you may think, oh, I'm seeing that as I'm going by in the car, I'll pull my camera out and take a picture of it. You're moving. Even if your subject is standing still. Like, for instance, if you were driving by a building that you wanted to take a picture of, the building's not moving, you're moving, right? And that's important. So that's what shutter speed does. That's your down and dirty shutter speed thing. So a couple of things, a couple of pro tips. If you have ever taken a picture and you're using flash, right? If you have an external flash that sits on top of it, again, we'll get to those in future future lessons. If you got a flash, if you sat a flash on top of there, and you've got the flash at where you want it to be, and then you start saying, all right, I'm going to raise my shutter speed past 200. The minute you go past 200, you are going to get a black bar. Why? Because the flash is sending out light and is expecting it to come back, but the curtains aren't moving fast enough. Curtains can't move faster than 1/200th of a second. To catch up with the light that's coming off of a flash. They can't do it, right? And so every professional camera has something that's called high-speed flash sync, right? So if you are and the flash has it, sorry. So if you are shooting at over 200, so if you want to go to 250 or anything like that, you have to now adjust what's on your flash for high speed flash sync, right? And it's on all professional camera flashes, the ones that sit on your hot shoe, right? So if you've ever had that black bar and you're like, why am I getting this black bar? I can't figure it out, and you're doing all the rest of that stuff, that's the reason why. And so that's a really important tip, and when it comes to pro cameras and trying to figure out what's happening with your actual camera. So I'm gonna go back here and see if there are anything that I missed. Yes, shutter speed. A lot of people saying hello. Hi. All right. So as you see there, if you found any of this stuff interesting, please hit the tip jar. Next week, we are going to be talking about Aperture, right? And Aperture is one of those things that a lot of people, I almost forgot. I wanted to tell you why you would want to blur something out. Okay, so blur automatically tells you that something is moving, right? So when you see something blurry with streaks, as opposed to what we're going to talk about next week, which is focal blur, when you see something blurry because of streaks, it tells you that the thing that you're taking a picture of is moving, right? And so you'll see a lot of that with car ads, right? So you'll see the background of a picture really all blurred out, right? But the car is really, really sharp. And so that's a technique that's called tracking, right? And what that is that this is moving across my screen, right? And so what I want is this thing, my hand, to stay permanently sharp, but I want the background to now be blurry. And so what happens is that photographers, and you can try this at home, they'll lower their shutter speed to where you'll get a blur anyway. So somewhere around 30 or 40 or something like that. And what they'll do is they'll move the camera in the same speed with the object, relative to the object. So if it's a car going across, you'll move the camera with how fast the car is going. Or if it's a hand, you'll move the camera with the same speed that the hand is moving. When you click the shutter with that speed, the shutter will match how the subject is moving. But because the camera is actually moving, remember what I talked about, sometimes the subject is moving and sometimes the actual camera is moving. Because the camera is actually moving, everything else in the picture is going to come out blurry. And I want you to try that, right? So find something that's moving, a cat, your dog, a car, a kid, your ex-husband. So find something that's actually moving and track it going across. And right when you want to catch it, at the best point, hit the shutter speed, but keep your camera moving, right? The thing will be sharp and everything else behind it will be kind of blurry. Don't forget to give advice looking for Nikon Coolpix for a novice. So here's the thing that I always tell you about cameras, right? When you start to look at cameras, and this was the advice that I was given, think about where you want to go. Are you going to be a professional photographer? Are you hoping to really do some inventive, dope stuff? And are you going to add to your equipment, right? So that's the first thing that you want to ask yourself. And because when you are looking at camera equipment, most of the stuff goes one-to-one. So I'm a Canon guy. I can buy as many different bodies, Canon bodies, as I want, right? So if it comes out with a new body, I can buy a whole new body. I can buy a different kind of body. I can add on to my kit, but my glass, the lenses, right? The lenses will transfer to a number of different bodies and will transfer to a number of different places. So if you think that you're going to be a Nikon person and you've tried it out, and you think that you're going to be a Canon person and you've tried it out, or a Sony or a Fuji or one of these people, all of these cameras work well. All of these cameras are perfectly good to start working with. But what you want to do is make sure that you know that you're going to stay true to that, because once you buy a Canon camera for one, like a DSLR, and you start adding glass and you start adding flashes and stuff like that, that stuff doesn't work with Nikon. And most of the times it doesn't work with like Sony and all the rest of that stuff unless you buy adapters. So all of these cameras work really well, right? Especially if you're getting into the point where it's an introductory camera into DSLRs. And it's literally the difference between, do you like Mercedes, do you like BMW, or do you like Audi, or do you like Volvo? That's all it really is, right? Because each one of these camera companies has a camera that will lead you in. It's called an entry-level camera. And so if you are thinking about being a real hobbyist and you think you're going to get all of this different kind of gear, different lenses, different flashes and stuff like that, pick a company, and there's an entry-level camera for all of them, and they all will do the basic things. Everything that I've told you, everything that I'm teaching will always be available on all of these different cameras. And so I would pick one that you feel comfortable with. I'm a Canon guy. There are a bunch of people who are Nikon guys that will never pick up a Canon. Some people don't like Sony, but so it depends on what feels good. And sometimes feels good is literally what I'm talking about. Some people like the feel of one type of camera as opposed to another. Like, I pick up a Nikon and I don't like where the buttons are for Nikon. It's an aesthetic thing. Is Nikon better than Canon? Of course it is. No. I mean, is Canon better than Nikon? Yeah, of course it is. Jokes, right? But there are places that Canon will do better than Nikon. There are places that Nikon will do better than Canon, that Sony will do better than all of them. It's really up to where you want to go. Do you want to be a Sony person? Do you want to be a Nikon person? Do you want to be a Canon person? And then just committing to that. Because once you start to buy equipment, you can't go back and forth unless you're one of those rich people that have enough money to buy across lines. So like I said, you stick with it, and then you go up. All of those things are available. Now, I said all of that to say, if you are really interested in building your kit, if you are really interested in buying equipment, adding on to stuff, if not, if you want to, if you're an Instagram person, or you are a person who just wants to take really good pictures of their family, I would go for something like a Coolpix, right? This is an old version of that, but this is a camera that has a fixed lens, right? So you can't take the lens off. And the zoom and everything is in here. There's some really great entry-level Coolpix, one shots. All of these camera companies have really good cameras that have internal lenses, and the zoom is great. it fits in right in your pocket, in your bag, or wherever you want to carry it. And so somebody once asked me, "What's the best camera?" And the answer is always going to be the camera, the one that you can carry with you, the one that you have with you. So if you buy this and it's so heavy and laborious, and you don't want to carry it around, you're not going to take it with you, and you're going to miss all of the opportunities to take pictures. You want to be able to know what your style is. Are you going to carry around the camera? Like for me, I got tired of walking around with this thing all the time, and I literally went out and I got myself a Sony, right? And so this is the camera I throw in my bag, right? So when it's time, when I'm walking around, or I've gone to work, or I see something really funny, or see something interesting, this is the camera I use, right? And this happens to be a mirrorless DSLR, but it's a smaller camera. It's not a Canon. I went out and got lens adapters so that I can use my Canon lenses on the Sony. But again, the best camera that you have is the one that you carry with you, right? And so this is what ends up taking a lot of pictures sometimes. But when I'm intentional about doing something different, I pull this bad boy out. All right, so I think that's my answer, and we can go down the lines of like, what are you going to be using it for? And certain cameras are better for certain things, and then others, And again, some people are really opinionated about it. I know what I like, but I'm not going to tell you that one thing is better than the other, right? So one thing that you should know, Canon started off as a camera company, and then added their lenses to it. Nikon started off as a lens company and then added cameras so that they could have better cameras taking their pictures. Sony is at the top of the line for sensors, and now both Canon and Nikon are actually using Sony sensors. So what are you looking for, right? Are you looking for crisp pictures where you can zoom in and see every single pixel, right? Maybe you're a Sony person, right? And so it's really about what works for you and what you're going to carry. Because if you're not going to carry it, it's useless. I can't tell you how many people have gone to Costco, bought a whole camera kit, and every bit of the equipment is sitting at home because it's heavy. I don't want to carry it around with me. That's fine. But then you bought the wrong camera, right? You should have bought something that's a little bit smaller, and you can take it with you. Is that Sony better than the similar Canon G series? I have not been able to play around with the Canon G series. The only reason that I would say that it's better is that Sony, the sensors that Canon and all these people are using are the ones that Sony's developing, and here you have it native to the camera. I'm not really impressed with Sony's lenses. It is what it is. I still use an adapter to use my Canon lenses on the Sony. I bought this because, and I'll be frank with you, Joe, I bought this because it was inexpensive, and like I said, I wanted something that I could throw in my bag every day and have it with me, as opposed to putting this in my bag or carrying a separate camera bag, right? And again, that's the long and short of it, right? I am still working my way around to liking mirrorless cameras. Full disclosure, this one has not failed me. I think it's fine. Again, but I'm saying I'm still working my way around to liking mirrorless cameras. That's just me. All right. All right. So I'm going to wrap it up here. I thank everybody who has jumped in and asked questions. You see the tip jar there. If you got a good tip, leave me a good tip. And we will be back next week. Next week we'll be talking about Aperture. Now, Aperture is about... when we talk about aperture, we're talking about depth of field. And so when you look at a picture, you see certain things are in focus and certain things are out of focus. And we talked about things being blurry because they're going too fast. But I also mentioned that things may be blurry because of their focus, right? So focus has to do, your aperture has to do with how much range of focus you have. So if you think about my fingers from here to here, right, this might be a range of focus, right? And this is what's called a shallow depth of field, which means that depending on where I move my camera, either this might be in focus or that might be in focus and this be out of focus. And we'll talk about what aperture means. And so aperture really deals with those pictures that you see where part of the picture is nice and crisp and everything behind them falls off into a blurry out of focus. Or you may look at, like I said, a landscape picture and everything is in focus. Everything from the mountains to the little horse that's right up in front. Of course, I'm thinking of Ansel Adams right now. So that's what Aperture does, and we will go through all of that next week. All right? Again, my name is Hayden Green. Thank you so much for hanging out. I will see you next week.